February 6, 2002, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police started searching what would turn out to be one of the biggest crime scenes in North American history, Robert William Pickton's pig farm. They started the search in February of 2002 and ended the search in November of 2003. Robert William Pickton was born and raised on his family's pig farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. He had one sister and one brother, and from a very early age, their parents decided that they had to work on the farm. They would often leave school at times to come tend to the farm. Because of this, they all had a certain stench that would never leave, and they were ridiculed and shunned by their peers. His childhood never reflected any specific behavioral problems, but his parents were fairly abusive to specifically him when he was a child. When he was young, he was given a calf, and he raised it all by himself, and when his parents were angry with him, they lashed out and they slaughtered the calf right in front of him. He would also frequently hide in pig carcasses so that he wouldn't have to see his parents. Robert never graduated high school, never got married, or never had children. He stayed at the pig farm like his parents had wished, but he also had a side gig. He opened up his own version of a nightclub called Piggy's Palace Good Time Society, and it was a place where he and his friends could drink, do drugs, and hire sex workers. However, around 1995, he started doing different things with these sex workers. He would either meet them at his Piggy Palace, or he would pick them up in the east side of British Columbia. To get these women to trust him, Pickton would use a lot of different ruses. Sometimes he had women in the car with him that he had threatened to be there. Other times he would offer them drugs because he knew that most of them were drug addicts. When he gained enough of their trust, he would bring them back to his house, sleep with them, and then decide to kill them. He would do it pretty much differently every time. He would either shoot them or slaughter them like pigs. Pickton had been murdering women for 2 years and had nobody on his trace until one night, March 23rd, 1997. He hired a sex worker for that night and brought her back to his house, and they did what they did until he began to handcuff her and she realized what was about to happen. So she tried to escape from him. She grabbed a knife from his kitchen. She stabbed him. He stabbed her. They were in a knife fight, but ultimately she escaped from his house. She then ran out into the street and she began banging on any doors that she could find and even flagged down a car and stopped the people inside. This woman chose to go by the alias of Mrs. Anderson. Later that night, she ended up in the hospital and the police came and began interviewing her. They assessed her injuries and saw that she was still handcuffed around one wrist. Later that night, Pickton came into the same hospital and the police assessed his injuries and deemed that they seemed similar. So they searched him, and in his pockets they found handcuff keys. They took those and went to the girl and unlocked them from her wrist. Obviously, it was a pretty open and shut case, so they arrested Pickton. One would think that this is where Robert Pickton would get caught, but that is incorrect. When this case went to trial, the victim was ruled an unfit person to testify against Pickton because she was a drug user. This let him go on until 2001, killing almost 50 women. By the 2000s, after looking at hundreds of suspects, they finally found out that Pickton was their guy. However, there was nothing they could do about it because they had no evidence as of yet that it was him. However, on one of the tip lines that they set up to help catch this guy that was killing all these women, somebody called in a tip about Pickton unrelated to the killings. This guy had said that Pickton had a lot of illegal weapons on his farm, and that gave police a probable cause to get a search warrant to search his farm. However, when the police went and searched his farm, they could not look at anything that was not for firearms. But there was evidence all around which gave them even more probable cause, and that led to them being able to search his whole farm. Once they were able to search Pickton's farm in relation to the crime, evidence was everywhere, all over his entire property. In his house, in his brother's house, and in his slaughterhouse. They found blood, they found DNA, they found objects from these women such as medications and inhalers, they found driver's licenses, they found body parts, they found a lot of blood, they found bone fragments, and they even found severed heads. After the police caught his confession on tape and with all the evidence at his farm, evidence such as blood all over the property, there were plenty of items such as multiple inhalers from around the property from multiple women, DNA samples from Pickton and his victims, blood samples from Pickton and his victims, as well as just a lot of blood all over his property and home. Another strong piece of evidence used in the trial was the fact that there was a witness there for one of the murders. Pickton had a female friend that he let stay with him because she was a drug addict and he would provide her drugs and let her stay as long as she worked for him. One night, he brought a woman home while she was in the other room and she heard everything that went on, and then he took this woman out to the barn, killed her, and the other woman watched as Robert did so. The trial was fairly easy. They couldn't try him for all 49 murders because there wasn't enough evidence to do so, but they could link him to 26 and they charged him for 6. They later tried to charge him for another one, but there wasn't enough evidence, so Pickton was ultimately found guilty for these 6 murders and was charged with life in prison without opportunity for parole for 25 years. This means most likely he will die in prison. Currently, Pickton is in a Quebec prison and he will be ineligible for parole until 2032. However, he will be 83 when that does happen.